Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have a special guest, Gareth Havis from ThreatLocker. Some of the folks on the call will recognize Gareth because he's the one who does our audits with us on a regular basis. And we had a lot of fun putting this together. Thank you, Nancy. And Nancy is traveling today, so she's not going to be able to be on the call, but thank you to Nancy, as always, for bringing the community together. Thank you so much to Gareth, because I know you're booked solid all the time, every day. And thank you so much for joining us. And we got Linda, our Director of Operations, here as well. So with that,
everybody.
thank you, everybody in our community, for joining us. And I will turn it over to Gareth.
Yeah, welcome everyone. You just drop down on here. Okay, so today we're going to talk a little bit about some of the cyber threats that exist in the world, because a long time ago, it wasn't that much of a concern for cyber threats as people were starting to get out into the digital space. There wasn't that many computers, and there wasn't really anything that anyone was considering to steal data that existed on these machines. But as time goes on and everything becomes digital, that doesn't really leave threat actors many other choices. So enter the world with ransomware and malware. Now, a while ago, when it comes to concerns of threats of ransomware or malware, I mean, it still wasn't huge. There'd be 1, 2 to 10 different types of malware out there. So as far as what you needed to protect yourself against that was just a decent antivirus. Because if you could spot these 10 different threats, then great, they'd be able to tell you as soon as they came into your environment. But what you're always going to find as time goes on is as we improve our levels of security, then the threat actors are going to improve their methods of infiltration into our systems. And each year that goes by and every successful cyber attack is proving that we need to up our game, because a lot of the focus for people's security has come down to a very reactive approach. We had antiviruses, and then we had EDRs and XDRs and MDRs, and it's a lot of detection and response. And as a result of that, especially over the last few years, if you look at 0 days like the Felina incident with Microsoft Office, which I can talk to some of these a little bit as well to give some people some clarification, but if you look at these incidents like Felina or the SolarWinds incident, the Kaseya incident, or the 3CX incident, you might not use any of these programs, but all of these were legitimate programs that were exploited to do things that the software could do, but used maliciously. So, for example, of Kaseya, SolarWinds, and 3CX, all of these were legitimate updates of the software that had exposed vulnerabilities. And as a part of that exploit, what was happening was the threat actors would take advantage of it, use it to connect to a command and control server, which is their own hosted device, where they could then initiate commands on the machines themselves that you have that are exploiting this vulnerability. And as a result, payloads or malware would be downloaded onto machines and executed. Now, when it comes to any kind of attack, there's usually a similar entry path. It's either going to be through legitimate software that you utilize, where there's bad updates being pushed out for them. It could be legitimate software you have that don't have bad updates, but do have dangerous use cases, like remote access software, for example, by tricking a user into installing a tool that allows somebody else remote access to your machine. Or it could be through hacking tools. Right? There's a lot of cool examples of tools that you can use today that an end user would know nothing of, but for a threat actor, I mean, it's a guaranteed access point. And I have an example of one of these here, and if I hold this up, it just looks like an iPhone cable. And in essence, that's what it is. If I plug this into my computer, I can charge my phone with it, no problem. But what it actually is a miniature keyboard. So in the side of this casing, there's something that looks somewhat similar to this, and I have a different tool for this one as well. And this is a keyboard, or it's a miniature computer, and when you plug it into your computer, it will register as a keyboard. And there's a few different iterations of this, like this one here, which is a USB stick. But what's very unique about this one is it will actually give off its own Wi-Fi connection. Now, I'm going to show you this here, and we'll be able to switch over to my other computer.
Okay, I think,
Excellent.
did that go over there? I hope.
It's coming up, guys. Should be able to see my desktop right now. Perfect.
Yeah, I see a bird.
Yep. So if
We
we
have
look at my
two
Wi-Fi
separate computers going now.
excellent. So if you look at my Wi-Fi connections right now, you can actually see here one called OMG. Now that is this cable. It's called an OMG cable. And the purpose of this Wi-Fi connection is so that I can get you guys to plug this into your computer. And that might be through just leaving it by an end user so that they see it and think free cable, let me plug this in. Or I might just walk past your computer and actually plug this in myself, because nobody's going to think anything of an iPhone charger being plugged into their machine. But the result of this, and I'm going to plug it into my machine and I'm going to connect to this, is so that I, as the threat actor, can connect to this router. And it comes with its own password, of course. And then I can connect to the IP address of that machine. And you should see it loading up. Give it just a second. Might not like my VPN right now. Oh, that's why I disconnected the OMG cable. Sorry, let me connect back to that. There
It's
we go.
amazing that the hackers have, it's amazing what they come up with, right?
Yeah. Okay. All right. Should be up now. So what I've connected to is the web UI for the OMG cable. Now, I'd be doing this as the threat actor sitting across the room or in another room while you have this plugged into your machine. And what this allows me to do is now run commands remotely. So if I click on this file menu, I can load any payload that I build, and I can tell it to do anything that I want. Now, a lot of you might not even know what things like PowerShell and command prompt are, but on any one of your machines, it's a tool that's there. It's built into the Windows OS, and it gives the user or the person operating it full control over anything on their machine. And this could be used for legitimate purposes like patching software, because PowerShell can be used to download files from the internet and run them. But it also could be used for the inverse of that, which could be downloading malware. Other cases, and what this case is going to exploit rather well, is the fact that PowerShell can access every one of the files in my environment, and as a result, I can tell it to do whatever I want. Now, the script that I have loaded in here, it looks like a bunch of gibberish, and there's a very important reason behind that, and it ties into EDR tools. A lot of EDR tools are built to look at legitimate things like PowerShell or your own programs and try to identify misuse of these tools. And when it comes to using tools like PowerShell, a lot of that is going to be based off of what the script says to do. Now, I could write all of this in free text so that
Yeah.
as someone
And
who's familiar with scripting.
Gareth, right now we're still seeing the desktop. I'm not sure if you're trying to show us a different
Oh,
window.
let's see. Does it not want to show my browser?
Oops.
Just stop the screen share there for a second. Oh,
Yeah,
okay. Here we go. I can change what I'm
and
actually
just while
sharing.
he's loading that, because we like acronyms. So EDR is Endpoint Detect and Response. So you can think of that as souped up antivirus.
Yeah, my VPN was just causing me to disconnect from it. I see the
Yeah.
problem.
Gotta
Okay.
love technology.
Yeah.
And do you see the web browser now?
No, we're
Not
still
yet.
seeing the desktop.
Let's see. Why? It says it's showing just a window. Let me try and switch it over to the whole screen. No, that seems to be rather interested in my desktop.
Yes.
It's a beautiful bird.
Yeah.
Could you, let me change to another presenter. Let me switch over to myself.
Are you able to do that on your end, or?
Looks like it.
Okay. But we're still seeing the bird. Oh,
Shouldn't even be sharing my screen right now. Presenter.
yeah, this is kind of next level because we have Gareth logged in as two separate Gareths. So we have Gareth on the main computer, Gareth on the other computer, because these things are really cool to see. I go to the ThreatLocker conference every year, and it's just amazing to see what the hackers see from their end. And so I kind of know what Gareth is about to show, but I do hope everybody gets to see it in a minute here.
Hey, would you be able to forcefully switch over it? Because when I click on it, it does not let me do it.
Okay, now I think now you're the main. Now we see your PowerPoint slide.
Okay, and can you force it back over again? I'm hoping that what it
Yes.
does is it just forces it onto the screen that I have loaded.
Okay, and
This is really
now
the last place we need to be anyway.
I think you dropped off as a presenter
Yeah.
because now I'm not seeing another option.
Yeah, showing as offline.
Showing us offline. It's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Love it when the demonstrations don't go as we like.
Yeah, connected to the other Wi-Fi, and it kicked you off. I think.
Oh yeah.
I think because you switched networks, so real life here. It didn't like going on the OMG network.
No, kicked you off.
Okay. Let's see if I can get this.
I think if you connect back in again to the webinar platform.
Yeah, so
I'm seeing offline from here.
Yep.
I'm wondering if on that laptop, if you totally exit out of, like sign off of GoToWebinar and then sign back in again as your secondary presenter, I think that may work because you're reporting offline on our end.
Okay. Let me do that.
Yes, we'll usually do in our cybersecurity awareness training. So we ask people to like have your own cable and have your own charger block too, because some of the other scams you may have a legit cable and you plug it into a USB that could have been taken over by a hacker. So just bring your own charging block and your own cable with you. And no matter how curious you are, never check out what's on a USB stick that you see lying around. It's I've been to conferences where they have that, a vendor will do that kind of as a game. They'll just drop a few USB sticks around. It's like, oh, hey, if it's a large size one, that's worth some bucks. So a little too tempting.
Yeah.
All right, and now I see.
Is it?
Are
shouldn't be in.
Are you getting back on the other network?
VPN so that it lets me back on. I'm in a country where they don't allow it, so I gotta go on VPN for this one. Okay. Well, while we're waiting on this one to load, I'll talk a little bit to it. So I showed you guys what it actually looks like on the inside, and as I mentioned, this is actually a miniature computer. You'll notice here, I don't know if you can see it very well, there's an SD card placed in there. And this is a different form to the OMG cable. This is actually what we call a rubber ducky. But this is why the warnings for plugging in other people's USB drives are very real, because on that SD card is a preloaded script. And that preloaded script is, of course, whatever I write it to do. And what happens is if you plug this into a computer, it will immediately start typing out whatever the commands that you've loaded into it are. Now, a common use case for that could just be a silly prank where I have it plug into a computer, load a few websites just as a gotcha for your friends. But I mean, more commonly, especially as a threat actor, that's going to be to steal the files on your machine or to encrypt that data. And it's very easy to do because this thing types 1,000 keys a second. So if you think somebody typing 80 keys a second is fast or 80 keys a minute is fast, 1,000 a second is a lot faster. And it can instantly initiate this attack. I leave it for 2 seconds, I unplug it from your machine, and you'll never know what's happened. And it's why things like EDR tools are important, but aren't always going to be effective. Because if we time this out to be faster than what they can capture, they might miss it entirely. Or, and what I was hoping to show you, if we can encrypt the writing in the script to just be a bunch of random characters, so it seems from an outsider's view, but it's still actually completely relevant, and it is typing a command that only command prompt or PowerShell is going to recognize, then I can get around the detection software you have, because when your EDR is looking for key strings, keywords inside of this script, it's not going to find any. It's seeing a bunch of randomized characters. And this is why solutions like Zero Trust are very important, and solutions like ThreatLocker. Because when it comes to that first step, that initial access into the environment, and am I sharing the slide still?
Yeah, we're seeing, the PowerPoint initial access right there.
All right, yeah. So when it comes to this first step of initial access, there's a lot that you can do to prevent these things from ever really happening. As an EDR product looking for threats, remote access tools aren't a concern. As an EDR tool looking for concerning scripts running in the environment that might download tools that give the user access or the threat actor access to your environment, if we encrypt the commands that I'm passing through tools like PowerShell and Command Prompt, it becomes much harder for me to identify what it's doing as an EDR. But with a zero trust solution like ThreatLocker, where you're implementing primarily a default deny based approach on various actions like the ability to execute a file or the type of access that tools like PowerShell or Command Prompt have in your environment to begin with, you can prevent this first step very simply, because we aren't looking at files running in the environment and trying to determine if it's a threat or not. We're simply putting in a line and we're saying, this is what we've considered as acceptable programs in the environment, or this is what we've considered as acceptable use of software in the environment. Anything outside of that is prevented. So going back to a few of these examples, if we try to run scripts remotely, whether through the OMG cable, which I would have loved to show you, but demonstrations don't always go as planned, or manually through this rubber ducky, it's going to be very difficult for me to really get anywhere, especially as someone, if I'm using this rubber ducky, who only has a short period of time before you come back to your computer. If I plug this in, I don't have time to troubleshoot why something is failing. And with a solution like ThreatLocker, it will be failing, because when it tries to run these commands and say it tries to connect to a command and control server, or it tries to run a piece of malware in the environment, or it tries to access the files in your system, these are all things that we've curated for what is acceptable of these tools. Therefore, it will only ever be able to get to data that was absolutely necessary for the people using those tools and nothing else, which for the majority of your users who don't know what PowerShell and Command Prompt are, it's going to be very, very little. But moving past the initial access, we get to the reconnaissance step. Right? Once they're in your environment and they have the ability to actually launch things in the environment or to run scripts, typically they're going to be trying to figure out the rest of your systems. They might have one device breached, but they want to figure out your layout. They want to know what servers you have and what their functionalities are. They want to know what ports are open so they can figure out how to get to these devices. And a lot of that is going to come down to things like IP scanners. And there are a number of examples of these, like advanced IP scanner or angry IP scanner, anything with IP scanner in the name. But all of these tools, again, aren't malicious. So when it comes to a detection standpoint and trying to identify a threat, it's not going to be considered a threat, because it is a legitimate tool and it's serving a legitimate function of identifying what ports are used on your network, which is useful, unfortunately, to both a threat actor and your IT administrators. But again, if we implement a zero trust approach into your environment and we're preventing the execution of software that was not necessary, it means tools like IP scanners can't run unless they were already authorized, which will only ever be under a situation where your actual IT administrators do need to run those programs, which they can then allow as required. So stepping beyond this point then, there's a lot of different controls that you can implement in an environment to offset some of the general concerns that you might have with an EDR solution's ability, an endpoint detect and response ability, for those that aren't familiar with the acronym, or an antivirus's ability to identify a threat. Now, in ThreatLocker's case, we have these 8 different controls. There would be our allow listing, which is a default deny approach to the ability to execute files. Our ring fencing, which is a default deny approach for the access any given software in your environment is allowed, whether that be to your files, to the internet, or to other applications. Our elevation control, which allows you to very easily take away the administrative footprint that's in your environment, reducing the amount of potential credentials that exist for administrative profiles that could then be compromised by a threat actor, because instead of having admin accounts, you can just choose the relevant programs that need those permissions. We have our storage control, which allows you complete monitoring of all data access in your environment. So if a process is scanning thousands of files, it's going to be something that we can see. If a user is the person who is taking data, we're going to be able to see that they're offloading a lot of information from a network shared to a USB drive. And then there's a lot of other controls here, but a very important one is our network controls, which allow you to get a lot more control over how devices can communicate in the network. Each of these have a very important reason to be there, and it comes back to the different points of an attack, whether it could be the initial access and preventing the tools that somebody can load into the environment, or preventing the reconnaissance stages, where we're limiting how they can get to your data, or we're limiting what tools they can use to scan your network, or even limiting how your devices can interact with the rest of the network, what they're actually able to see and what they're able to get to. And then for this final step, of course, being, I'm just moving this out of the way so I can look at it a little bit better, the delivery, the execution of the scripts that they have, the exfiltration of the data in your environment, sending it out of your environment to their own data stores. All of these different controls that we've got in this list play a different role in each of those areas to make sure that data isn't just freely accessible, to make sure your applications are controlled in what they can get to as far as the internet goes or other data, making sure that credentials aren't there and available to be compromised, and overall preventing unauthorized software from executing inside the system. Now, when I'm talking a lot about these controls, I can understand from an outside perspective, it's seeming like a false dream, in the sense that it's a lot. A default denying the ability to execute files, default deny controls on all of your software. It sounds like an absolute hassle to get out there. But I can speak from experience, being my job of actually setting this up. It really doesn't take as long as you might think, especially with a lot of the things that we've done in our solution to try and make that more available to companies of all sizes. And it starts with this first step of learning your software. Because we're not here to we're not here to be a judge on what programs you should and shouldn't have. So in the earlier stages of implementing a solution like ThreatLocker, what you have is just an agent that figures it all out for you. It's going to tell you and report to us what software you've got and what that software looks like. That way, we can get a list of applications without you guys needing to lift a finger. And then we can go back and review that list of applications with you guys to make sure that as you're going through this, you're comfortable with what you're seeing. This could be quite a revealing time because you get a chance to see a lot of what your users have been able to do up to this point in terms of the programs that they run. Now, you might have already jumped ahead in terms of stages of security and removed administrator credentials across the board, and that is a very important thing to do if you haven't already. But a lot of the time I find that when people have done that, the question then becomes, if I'm already removing administrative permissions, my users aren't installing applications, which means if I look at a list of software that we've got in our environment, I'm not going to be surprised. As well as, why do I need something that's going to prevent the execution of software when users can't install it on their own? And these would all be very valid points. However, not every program requires admin permissions to install, unfortunately. As we've gone towards a very user-focused society, that means there's a lot of tools out there that don't require administrative permissions to put into the environment. And really, anything that doesn't install machine-wide is not going to need administrative access. A good example could just be a browser extension. And as a user who is just using their device on a day-to-day basis, they're not thinking anything of these. They're looking at a browser extension that helps them save things in Pinterest, or they're looking at a browser extension to open up and keep track of their bets in Bet365. And these are all real examples that I run into on a regular basis, by the way. They don't think anything of it. But when it comes to a work environment, this type of software is what I would consider unnecessary, and a risk that you're introducing that is unnecessary. Because, as we mentioned earlier on, with a few specific examples of 0 days, it's not always a piece of malware that is your problem. Sometimes it is the legitimate software in your environment that becomes the risk. And it could be tools that are widely used by IT but it also could be tools that are widely used by end users. And it's a risk that doesn't need to be a factor in your own system when you can simply take it away, and it will not decrease productivity of work because they're not using it for work. So at learning stage, it's very important being able to show you guys what kinds of things you've got in your environment and actually giving you guys the tools to take these options away, make sure that these programs that the users are adding aren't able to run anymore. The next step beyond this point would be to review the data. Now, that is, again, a part that I play a very big role in, understanding what your environments look like and how ThreatLocker would be interacting with them. Because, again, I can tell you that our agent is going to be actively profiling everything in your system, but to somebody who doesn't work in ThreatLocker and actively see it all day long, that can seem, again, a bit like a fake dream, something that is just seeming a little bit out of reach. And then it always comes down to the conversation of, I have this thing in my environment and it's a little bit unique, or I have these users that do these tasks like developing code that's going to be a bit more unique. And I'm worried that learning mode in ThreatLocker is not going to account for that. And that is why during the onboarding stages of this, while it's in this learning period, what I do is I look over the data of how ThreatLocker would have interacted in your systems. What would have been blocked by our agent? What is learning mode doing to make sure it's not blocked? And if I feel that there's something better that could be done to make it work better for you guys, I make that change. That way, when we're actually moving to this step of enforcing that control, making sure that that default deny is in place, we know we've accounted for everything because there's been reviews on that data of the things that ThreatLocker would have blocked to make sure that there is a rule in place that allows it. Now, it's at this next point after you've locked down that you typically start drilling down on that list of programs. I think it's a good thing to start early on in the process to get ahead of the project, but it's after you've locked down that you're really starting to draw the line in the sand and say, okay, nothing more from here, and what do we have that's already allowed that we want to get rid of? Because if you're trying to do it too early on, you're in learning mode, it's passive. If somebody adds a new program, it's going to populate it in the list, which means while it's good to start getting a look at that, the actual restriction and making sure that nobody can add these new programs into the environment is going to come in this latest stage. And one of the big things that we'll be doing during that time as well is removing the unused programs. I find that there is a lot of that in every environment. And to give you a bit more specific metric, when I do an onboarding for any given company, doesn't matter the size, when I get to this stage of removing unused programs, so software that we saw on the machine, but nobody is actually running, usually that takes away anywhere between 40 and 60% of the overall list of software that we saw, which is crazy because it just means people are installing applications and doing nothing with them, which goes back to
forget they have them.
Yeah, they just forget it's there, which is taking up disk space. It might be running background processes, which could be slowing down your machine, where it's, again, just unnecessary because it doesn't need to be there. But the biggest concern here is that if that software has a breach, if that software is involved in some kind of 0-day, then you guys are at risk when you did not need to be because nobody was using the tool anyway. So that's a very easy step, but a very important one to do because it's good to get rid of the things in your environment that aren't in use, and ThreatLocker is going to help you guys keep track of those programs and make sure that they're being utilized and not just going left dormant in your environment. So beyond this step, it would then be a case of looking at controlling the programs. Because as I mentioned, a lot of the time it's going to come down to weaponizing your own programs, and that's where the risk is. And this is where it becomes very difficult for an EDR tool to do its job, because if you're looking at legitimate processes doing things that are considered legitimate but actually could be malicious, for example, uploading data to Google Drive, it's fine if it's your Google Drive, but it's my Google Drive. So then it's a problem. But how do you discern that? Right? It's those types of things that we want to address with ring fencing. So we start to look at the programs that remain on the list of things that should be able to run in the environment, and we start taking away behaviors. And it can be pretty cutthroat. We look at a software and say, no internet access, no file access, no registry access. And we do that because we don't know what it needs yet. But what we do is we simulate those ring fencing policies. We essentially put them in a monitoring state so that we can just use the data that we track in our platform to understand what these tools are doing that we would conflict with, and account for that behavior ahead of time. Takes a little bit longer, but it's a definitely worthwhile step. And if you think about it, most programs don't need full internet access. They download updates from one location, and that's not going to change. If they start downloading updates from somewhere else, I would be concerned. So it's very good to get this type of step in place. But after that point, you secure that restriction, and then if there's any other programs that we want to add restrictions to, we do exactly that. But once you get this part in play, it then just comes down to day to day. If a user tries to install an application, if they try to run a file that's not approved, it's going to be prevented. ThreatLocker will block it from executing, which does mean if they install an application, there's going to be a process of request around it. And it might not be an instant process where they're able to install the applications they want. And that's because somebody does need to be able to look at this that is not the user and can come from an objective standpoint and say, what actually is this program and why do you need it? And in the option for request, which you can see on this screen, the user will have a place to voice their reasoning for why they want these things. And it's going to be through that message that the people administering the ThreatLocker platform will look at and try to make a decision based on what the program is. But this way, users aren't installing a whole bunch of random applications they don't need. And again, because of this default deny, if a piece of malware comes onto your machines, it will fail to run. There is no other solution, no other security tool that you can get in your environment that can give you the same confidence that a whitelisting product does. And I don't just mean ThreatLocker, any whitelisting product, any default deny on the ability to execute files will guarantee stop a piece of malware that's running on a machine. Because if it tries to execute, unless you guys go whitelist it, it doesn't run. And there's just something very beautiful about that. And it's why zero trust is becoming such a common occurrence in any kind of security conversation, because we're realizing now that we can't just keep layering on detection. If we keep looking for only what we know to be a threat, we're always going to be behind. With zero trust, it's about stopping this rat race and saying, well, I don't know all the threats, but I do know what I need to run, and therefore I'm going to allow that. And when it comes up for a case of conflicting, where a user does do something that's outside of the ordinary, so we see there'll be a process of request built around it so that they can voice why they need these things and they can easily be allowed. The next steps of this then, after we've got the application side of the house sorted, is just about controlling the network and controlling the storage. But it follows a similar path. We're going to use data to show us how things are operating, how your devices are communicating with each other, how they're being accessed, why these things are taking place, and we're going to start cutting out the unnecessary. Because it's far too common in any given network that if I breach one of your machines, I can get to one of the other ones, as long as I have the right credentials. And if you've got admin rights for everybody, then that's making it even easier for the threat actor. But even if you don't, credentials are the first thing to get compromised in any breach. As soon as we get access to the machine, with that OMG cable that I was trying to show you guys before, I could set it up as a keylogger. And what that means is while you guys are typing out things on your computer, I can see every single key you're pressing, which means if you fill out a UAC, or if I, as a threat actor, break something on your computer and you call in the IT team to come and help, and they put in their admin credentials, I've got those credentials myself now because I have this keylogger set up, and it can all be done remotely through that cable that I was hoping to show you a little bit more on. Mm-hmm. The point of this is credentials, they're the first thing to go. We need something that's going to prevent these types of lateral movement that don't involve relying on a secure username and password. And that's what the network control component of this is for, because most workstations, they don't need to communicate with each other. They can be isolated from each other. And that way, if one of them is breached, it's not a risk to everybody else. And it's a very easy thing to get that set up when you have all of the data. We review the logs, we'll go over and we'll build out rules to account for the things you need. And when we send it live, that's pretty much it. And you can talk to that experience because we recently did that with one of your clients. And there wasn't really much involvement from anybody in that other than me going through and doing it myself.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's one of the things we're really thrilled about with the partnership with ThreatLocker, because we get all the expertise behind the scenes. And I would say, like right now at this point, probably our 10% of our most security-minded clients are on this, and this whole cat and mouse game of security. is a real thing. As people put in more protections, hackers come up with more clever ways of doing things. Keyloggers, doesn't matter if you got a really secure password because the keylogger is going to record the whole thing. A couple other things. I mean, you brought up kind of briefly insider threat. Is somebody moving around a lot of files? Is somebody putting stuff on a USB stick? More and more, we're seeing more and more industries being regulated where they're not able to do that. And then I was thinking of your slide where you showed the reconnaissance. I was talking to a colleague who does incident response for insurance companies. So we were called in for boots on the ground for that. And he said that, like, almost immediately when a threat actor gains access to a network, one of the first things they're doing is they're searching for, they get on the server and search for insurance, some very, like INS or insurance, some form of insurance, because they want to know how much insurance the customer has, because they're going to tailor their ransomware request based on that. So it's a crazy world. But I think you did a great job going through all of this.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And that would really be the next, the final part of that is just looking at how your data is being interacted with to try and spot where we could improve on the practices that are currently allowed. I find it, again, I'm going to give some real examples without revealing which companies these are from because it would surprise you.
Yeah.
USB access is a huge one. Where it is allowed, it will be abused. And I don't necessarily mean be abused to steal files, though that is somewhat common, especially if someone's leaving the company. If they're leaving, they'll copy as much data as they can, and they'll go right to your competitor and give them that data under the condition they get a job. This is something that unfortunately does happen a lot. But I'm also talking personal use cases. Right? I've seen cases where I'm going through audits, and it's something that I just stumble across. I'm never actively looking for it, but I'll be looking at USB activity, and then I'll find a lot of indecent things on these USB drives. And that's about as much of it as I'm going to say on there. But a lot of things that you definitely shouldn't be doing on a work computer that users do. And I'm not in the same mindset, so I'll never be able to fully understand why. But again, it's a case of if it's available as an option, it will be abused. And when you start to get a look at how people are actually using these devices, it's a very big eye opener, and it all drives forward that need for implementing a control.
Yeah, and I think if you look at, you may do, a lot of folks we work with, we're really big on cybersecurity awareness training. We see that across the board. What people may know, what's right and wrong, and what they're supposed to do, and what they actually do are two really different things. All the different ways folks can get in. The concept of, if you think about it, any program on your computer that's running can see everything on your computer. So the idea of the ring fencing, it's sort of a maybe more advanced thing for folks to think about, but this is the kind of thing when Linda does reviews with our community, we want to get people thinking about this so at least they know it's possible. And what I love is that ThreatLocker's made this into a, what would have been purely an enterprise, accessible only to the enterprise, is really available to SMBs, because we like people to make informed decisions. Like, do you want to know if somebody's loading up a whole bunch of files on a USB? Do you want to know if, do you want to block programs from doing things, allowed programs from doing things they shouldn't be doing? Because it's kind of an eye opener when folks consider, like, you won't have another way of knowing and you won't have another way of stopping. And some of our folks, depending on what level of risk they want to tolerate in their organization, one of my greatest fears is that folks don't actually understand what the risk is and then don't make the right decision about how to protect against that risk. And then, when the bad day happens, the first thing they want to know is, well, how could this have happened? It's like, well, this is how it happened and it could have been prevented. So I think hopefully we do have this recorded for folks. I love talking to you, Gareth. We work with Gareth every other week. He does all the audits for the sites. I do want to point in one thing that's been really useful for us recently is we work with an organization in the Boston area that has an office overseas. And so they want to know how they can install software. It's like, well, it's easy. They just hit that little button, give their reason, and it's going to be fully vetted and investigated. So it's like, it's so easy. Nobody's going to be slowed down because they're in a time zone that's very different from ours, but they're going to be safe at the same time. So I love that. But I guess we're kind of at time here. I want to thank everybody for joining us.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And I apologize for not being able to show you guys the fun things I had planned. That would have been a great one.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know what? We'll have to record that another time, and we can get that out on our YouTube channel as well to show folks. Yeah, that would be really great to do, because it's really an eye-opener, because I've been to a lot of these different sessions going to Zero Trust World every year, and it's kind of mind-blowing. I wish all these hackers were curing cancer, because it would be cured. But thank you so much, Gareth. I know you have a really busy schedule, and Linda, you'll be having a lot of conversations with our community. Let people know, you know, this is within reach, and folks can do this. But thank you so much, and thanks everybody for joining us.
Fantastic. Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Thanks,
everyone. Thank you.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.